If anybody is going to, and now I do have power. If anybody's going to grow, if you want to grow, and frankly, this is a universal of all of life. I mean, it's not just things of faith, though it's absolutely true of things of faith. If you want to grow, you have to take risk, right? You got to put yourself out there in one way or another. You want to make more money? Well, you got to go through an interview, or you got to start a business, or you got to go to the bank and ask for something. You know what I mean? You want to get stronger, you're going to have to take risks and push yourself physically. If you want to grow internally, you're going to find yourself in situations that are not terribly comfortable. And the funny thing is, as Christians, somehow as we talk about Jesus coming and him loving us, and it all just feels so warm and fuzzy, right? But the truth is, if you want to grow as a person of faith, if you want to know God more, the journey is going to be one of risk. It's going to be one of putting yourself outside of your comfort zone into a place where you go, I'd rather not be here right now. I'd rather this be somebody else, or I'd rather be telling this story after it's all over rather than being in it, right? That is the process of growth. And we're going to be looking at a couple stories that sort of are intertwined together about that. The name of this sermon series that we're in is called Love Comes to Town. And it's taken from a line in a song that says, I did what I did before love came to town. And there's something about, it's a blues song and it's kind of edgy. And as we're looking at these stories of Jesus, it's got that thing to it. I did what I did before love came to town. Sometimes our stories of Jesus get really kind of, kind of floating along. And it's like, no, it's different than that. So here, we're gonna jump in. We're in Mark 5. So if you have a Bible, this is a great time to turn to that. Mark 5, starting with verse 21. Jesus had again crossed over by boat. He's like going back and forth across this lake. He had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake. A large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. So Jesus crosses the lake, gets out of the boat. It's getting to be pretty normal. I'm betting his disciples, his buddies who are traveling with him are getting kind of used to this, right? Get out, crowds. All these crowds. But every time they enter these crowds, something happens. And in the book of Mark, it's just there's a series of stories about Jesus' interactions with people, often just getting out of the boat. Like last week, it was a guy with a ton of demons in him and the whole craziness of that. This time he gets out, and this synagogue leader, and what you need to know, this is like, I don't know if any of you are, like the mayor of a town, or like the president of the Rotary Club. It's not just, it's my turn to be the synagogue leader. You got to be somebody special, somebody dignified, it's probably not professional, but you don't get this by being the poorest guy in the room. Right? So it's a person of dignity, a person of respect. People in the community know him and respect him. The other thing you need to know is that this is an honor-shame society. We live in, or we like to think at least, we live in sort of a meritocracy. This idea of if you're really great at something, then you get your respect. And if you're not, then, well, too bad. But in that society, it's much more positional. A position is respectable, and respectable people are in the position. You don't act respectable, you lose your position. You get the position, you get respect by nature of the position. So this guy clearly has a position, and he is a man of honor and respect. But you see this really interesting drama unfolding. He comes and he runs and he falls at Jesus' feet. And that's going to be as strange as it would be today. Right? If somebody came running up to you and fell at your feet and started pleading with you, right? That's kind of weird, right? We don't do that. This is definitely the times that you would see this is like with a king, right? Or with somebody with great power. So this dignified man is coming, he falls at his feet and he's begging Jesus. He's begging Jesus, "Jesus, would you come and touch my daughter, my little girl who's dying?" So, really, I mean, I'm sure for everybody around, there's a dramatic moment. Everybody's feeling this like, whoa, this guy's laying it on the line for his little girl. The other thing we have to know, there's just so many layers of culture that you kind of got to know. And if you know this already, great. If you don't, I want to fill it in. So if you're new, it makes a little bit of sense. So the thing you got to know about ancient society and girls is this is like way, way before the right to vote, right? This is way, way before any sort of kind of equality among the sexes or the genders. It's just like that. This is long before that. I think Pakistan or Saudi Arabia, right? This is a place where women have their place and men have their place, and men's place is clearly above women's place. Now, in the midst of that, you have to understand that there are layers, right? I mean, that not all women are treated like dogs, but if as a man you wanted to, you could. You had that power. Now, on the other hand, we see this kind of father right here is clearly invested in his daughter, right? He cares about this girl. He takes his position and all this. I mean, I think there's three things that have got to be going through his mind. One, the first one is obvious. He's clearly desperate. He wants his daughter to live. Second, he has to believe that there's at least a margin of chance, a margin high enough to risk his position, to risk his honor and respect, that Jesus has the power to heal his daughter. So at least and then third, he believes if he begs enough, he might get some of Jesus' time. And he's willing to do all of that because his life is wrapped up in his little girl. He really, really cares about her. Now, as I was preparing this, I was thinking about some videos I might show, and I'm not going to show any, but country music, man, it's got the corner on the father-daughter thing, right? I mean, I'm watching a couple of YouTubes, and I'm getting a little teary-eyed and thinking about it, about my little girl, that. I mean, it's that kind of thing. He really loves his girl. And now, when I was, when my daughter had just been born, she, at 6 months or 8 months or so, we discovered that she had a kidney issue. She had chronic kidney infections, keeping her from growing, and it turned out there was some biological stuff there that needed to be taken care of. And I remember at the church we were attending, you could come forward at the end of service and get prayer. And so, and we'll actually do that later today here. But anyways, I remember carrying her up with Karen to be prayed for as we discovered what was going on with her. And just here, I'm in front of church and I'm just bawling, because it's we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how this is going to work. And it just feels so vulnerable. And that's exactly what this guy is feeling. So, and Jesus agrees. The man is like, come, lay hands on my daughter so she'll live. Okay, they begin their journey. A large crowd followed and pressed around him being Jesus. And a woman was there who'd been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors. Any doctors in the house? Just saying. And had spent all she had. Instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized the power had gone out from him. He turned around to the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. And then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." So there's stories intertwined. He's off to Jairus' house, and on the way, there's this woman who has this flow of blood. Now, we got to talk about this flow a little bit. This is not, she's got a little cut somewhere that just doesn't seem to heal. This is like stuff you don't talk about in public, right? This is, she like probably around the time of puberty, started menstruating and didn't stop, right? So biologically that means, physically, it means she's probably anemic. She's probably weak because she's got this, it's just going and going and going. Now, once again, ancient society, it's very, very common for women during that time of the month, they they went to another part of the house or another place, and they were alone. And it's easy, once again, we have to, it's hard from a modern standpoint to interpret all of the traditions of ancient society, not just Jewish society, lots of societies. I was just reading today, in India, for instance, they still do this kind of thing where, if it's that time of the month, you can't do certain things. Now, there's another way, you could see that as oppressive, but there's another way to think about it. Women, you don't have to cook for 5 or 7 days a month, right? You don't have, your husband can't take advantage, can't impress his marital, kind of rights during that time. This is like break time. So there's another way to look at it. But for this woman, for her, it's really bad. Physically, it's draining. Socially, there's real problems associated with this. In the book of Leviticus, it says this. And Leviticus, for those of you who don't know, this is sort of like the health code, social standard, cultural mores. This is the book that sort of defines Jewish culture, or one of the 5 books that really define Jewish culture. So this is what it says. When a woman has a discharge of blood for many days at a time, other than her monthly period, or has charge that continues beyond her period, she will be unclean as long as she has the discharge, just as in the days of her period. Any bed she lies on with her discharge continues to be unclean as her bed during her monthly period. Goes on. You get this, and you're like, dude, I did not come to church to hear about this. Yeah, sorry. But here's the way it goes. In their society, this was the thing. During that time, anything she touches is unclean. She is ritually. Now, you got to, like I said before, this law is a little bit like the health code of the day. And there was a lot of really practical, really helpful things that for us as moderns, we don't necessarily get. But I had a real, we don't think about clean and unclean. Ooh, he's got cooties. You don't think that way since, like elementary school. But recently we had an experience that brought this a little bit more into light. We have a dog that, go ahead and put that picture up there. We have a dog, her name is Jenny, and she had an abscess on her side and had to have had to go in and have surgery and taken out. Well, it turns out that abscess had MRSA. So MRSA, it stands for something. I wrote it down here. It's a I won't even sure. Yeah, my wife could say it. Anyway, Staphylococcus aureus something, blah, blah. Anyway, so this is a bacteria that doesn't, like antibiotics don't, it's resistant to it, resistant to most everything. So she gets this surgery, and see how she has that little tube coming down? Well, it's draining. And we don't know at this point that she has MRSA. So she's in our house, and we're trying to get her better, but she's just not getting better. So we take her back to the vet and say, hey, we got to get this tested to find out what's going on. We find out, it is MRSA. And then we realize, this is not just a dog disease, right? She has been this biohazard in our house for 10 days, 3 weeks, right? And so now we have this biohazard, and she's sort of been, we've covered some things and stuff, but everywhere. And you just start to get this weird kind of unclean, right? And you don't know what is clean and what isn't clean throughout your house. Really, really creepy, right? You just don't know. One time I had a scratch, and I was examining it in the bathroom, and the dog is often in the bathroom, and I'd petted the dog, and then I'd been examining my wound, and I'm like, what have I done? And you got to kind of multiply that out. That is the kind of society that people, the germ theory of disease hasn't been developed. So they don't really get, they don't have a real clear vision for clean and unclean other than these ceremonial laws. And it really makes sense. So this woman, everywhere she goes, she is a biohazard. She can't go worship. She can't, it probably happened at puberty such that she wasn't able to get married. But if she had gotten married, think about this. If you find out in a society like that, if you find out that your wife is just, this starts to happen, most men aren't going to stay with her, right? 12 years of no sex in the marriage, right? That's absolutely the way it'd be. And the guy then has every right to say, boo, you're gone. We gotta have kids. We can't even see, technically they're not even really supposed to see each other because everything she's doing is unclean. Her life And this is almost surely a good chunk of her adult life, or if not all of it, has been defined by this disease. She's got serious, serious problems. It is ruining her life. And whatever money she's had, she's spent trying to go to doctors, trying to get answers, and none of it has worked. It's just gotten worse and worse and worse. She's in a desperate situation. And she sees Jesus going by, and she says, if I can just touch the hem of his robe, I'll get healed. Now, once again, there are layers to this culturally. Same book, back in the Old Testament, God had instructed them to wear garments with tassels on them. And there was this whole kind of picture way for them to both remember that they were God's people and they were to follow God's laws, and to distinguish themselves from other people. It's like, we're different. We're Jews, these tassels. And so there was very much that those tassels went on to sort of represent a person's authority. Like this was just had a lot of different kind of cultural meanings over the last couple thousand years since the law had been given. And then there was this prophecy in the book of Malachi. This prophecy that said, let's see here if I can find it. Yeah, it says, but for you who revere my name, the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in his wings. There was this prophecy that they came to understand about the Messiah. And when the Messiah comes, he's going to have healing in his wings. And the wings was a metaphor, was a reference to his tassels. So there is this cultural understanding that says the Messiah, when he comes to deliver us, even he is going to be so powerful that these little tassels that represent authority, that if you just touch them, you'll get healed. Now, to us, it sounds kind of superstitious. It's like, well, this is strange. What a weird, I'm going to put faith in your, robes? Strange. But nevertheless, she reaches out secretly. Everyone she's touching, she's a secret biohazard, right? She reaches out secretly and touches his robe. I mean, for her, it's perfect. It's like, I'm reaching out in faith. Jesus, I believe that you are the Messiah. And I don't, it's nice and anonymous, right? You can just do it and be done. And sure enough, power goes out from Jesus, and he's sort of aware. I mean, how does this work? Like his little sensor of battery power took a little hit there. Whoa, what went on, right? I mean, and the disciples are equally they're just like, what? We're in this crowd. I mean, people are pushing in on you, and you want to stop and say, somebody touched me? Are you joking? Everybody's touching you. Look, Jesus, I touched you. And Jesus will have none of it. He's like, no. I'm ignoring you now. Right? It's like what you're saying, we're not on the same page. I know what's happened in me, and I know that something has gone on. And so he's searching the crowd, and the language in the passage is really fascinating. Because it said, I'll read it again. But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. Now, this is really important, really fascinating, because Jesus could have just paused, looked around, said, whoa, what just happened? Made eye contact with the woman, given her a little wink or a little I got you, baby, right? I got you, girl. You're good, right? Nobody needs to know. If he wanted it to be anonymous, it could have been, right? But Jesus goes, no, time out, and makes everybody stop, and this big commotion. And somehow for this woman, she's really afraid, right? The spotlight has turned suddenly on her, and her whole life, the last 12 years at least, she has been out of the spotlight. She has had this shame that she has been hiding for 12 years. And now suddenly the spotlight is on her, and Jesus is drawing her out of the crowd. And she has this great issue. She is very much afraid of what kind of condemnation, what might come to me. And yet she also knows I have been healed. And the passage says very clearly, she tells the whole truth. Right? I mean, she's talking about the darkest, most intimate part of her story, right? It's stuff that even in modern society today, we don't go around talking about. Right? It's not the thing unless you're sort of in a sorority or something, you just don't go around chatting about, right? And here in mixed company, she is sharing about her darkest and most shameful point. And then Jesus says, daughter, your faith has made you well. Daughter. Now, mind you, this is a really interesting moment to say that. interesting story that Mark is weaving together, right? Because we just saw a picture of this father who really loves his little girl. And in the midst of that story, Jesus turns to this woman, draws her out, makes her tell her whole story in front of everybody so that he can say, daughter, your faith has made you well. In the grand story, there's a little bit of compare and contrast going on here, because the last talk of faith was Jesus with his disciples after he calms the storm saying, where's your faith? So his best boys, the guys who've been following him around, he's saying to them, and Mark is clearly laying this out, guys, where's your faith? Daughter, your faith has made you well. Her reaching out and saying, if I just touch him. And Jesus is like, I don't want to let you get away with just a mere physical healing. I want you to know the whole of your life, that you are a daughter and I love you, that you are worth stopping and putting the shining spotlight. Remember when I was talking about there's no growth apart from risk? This is it. He's saying, girl, you want the whole thing. And I'm not going to let you just slide away with a little bit of healing. Even though for us it seems like, well, that's the big part. But he's like, oh no, your soul needs to hear, daughter, your faith has made you well. Now the story goes on though. While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead, they said. Why bother the teacher anymore? Now, you got to be thinking, I'm not a particularly patient person, especially when I've got a big emotional thing on the line. This has got to be killing Jairus, right? I mean, he's there. He's got the teacher. They're on the way to see his little sweet pea get healed. And then he stops and makes this big commotion about this woman with a woman thing. I mean, like, come on, let's get home. And then the bad news arrives. Don't bother him anymore. She's dead. I mean, the bottom of his world had to have just completely opened up. I mean, just a gigantic flush. But Jesus turns to him and says something very, very specific. Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, don't be afraid, just believe. Don't be afraid, just believe. He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, John, the brother of James. And when they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. And when he said to them, why all this commotion and wailing? The child's not dead, but asleep. But they laughed at him. Interesting story, right? Jesus shows, first off, somehow Jesus tells the crowd, stay here. Takes 3 guys and mom and dad, shows up at the house, and there's already wailing. And that's once again, you got to kind of get back in this ancient mindset. Bodies decompose really fast. And so when somebody dies, you got to get there and get things taken care of pretty quick. And so the mourning process has already happened. And this is a synagogue leader. And so people are all, he's a popular guy and there's lots of people that are mourning. And Jesus comes up and says, hey, why are you crying? What's the big deal? Which is like, Jesus, why are you being so obtuse? The girl is dead. And Jesus is like, no, he's not dead. She's not dead, sorry. She's not dead, she's just asleep. Now that's really curious, right? Now, and the crowd's response is not, what? What are you talking about? The crowd's response is just laugh. That sort of cynical, like, you have no idea. How disconnected from reality could you be, Rabbi? You're so out of it. Once again, Jesus gets all of the crowd out of there. After he put them out, so he kicks everybody out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went in to where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, Talitha cum, which means, that's Latin, which means little girl, Aramaic, I think, which means little girl, I say to you, get up. Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this time they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat. So, Jesus comes in, says this word in another language. Everybody's probably bilingual. There's lots of bilingual stuff happening. Says it and raises her from the dead. Now, it's interesting because Jesus had just said she's not dead. She's asleep. So there's some questions going on. Either one, Jesus is saying, no, guys, you misdiagnosed her. She's not really dead. Possible. Two, Jesus is saying something to trick the crowd, to say, hey, to give them, and I think there might be some validity to this. Jesus is creating this space where people, there's a gap. Jesus is saying, look, if you want to believe, you've got to dive in and dig into this to figure out what's really going on. And he's creating this like gray zone for people. Because they can go away when the child comes out awake. Well, maybe we did diagnose. Or third, Jesus is saying, look, I've got a whole different perspective on death than you would think. And so we can see it from evidence as he says her name and raises her up, the mom and dad and the disciples clearly are astonished. They're like super astonished. They know that it's been a miracle. The people on the inside get to see the firsthand what kind of miracle Jesus has done. But at this point, Mark says, the girl was 12 years old. How long had the woman had the flow of blood? 12 years. This is really interesting, right? We've got this picture of this father who's begging for his daughter's life, on the way to healing his daughter. Now, Jesus could have said, go, man, I don't need to touch her. She's healed. He could have done it, and the story's over, right? He could have winked at the woman, made a little better time, not stopped to hear the whole story about her flow of blood and all that, and the story's over, right? Mark could have written about 100 different healings, but for some reason he chooses to say, oh, look, a 12-year-old girl, father coming and begging. This woman with this very woman problem, Jesus turning and saying, daughter, your sins are forgiven. Daughter, your faith has made you well. The woman in fear, it's very clear that she's afraid. Jesus turning to the father saying, do not fear, only believe. Then Jesus saying, little girl, get up. That happens to be 12 years old. What is going on here? What's the weave? Here's where I think how these stories are woven together. Mark is a big thing in the book of Mark is about parables. And he's giving a real life parable here. The father coming before Jesus begging for his little girl's life that he loves so much. Jesus is saying, you know what? This woman that he turns and says, daughter, I want you to know what kind of love I have for you. See this father who's begging for his daughter's life? I'm going to come and lay my life down for you. That is just a little touch of illustration of what I'm willing to do to see you made whole. I'm willing to reach out and touch and the fact that it's a story of women, I think is making a point that says, look, it doesn't matter where you are in the social spectrum. It doesn't matter. God is saying, I am so interested in your complete healing that I'm willing to go and beg to see you healed. I'm like that father. That's a picture of the heart of the Father. And further, I don't want to let you just get away with a little healing. I want to see you restored completely to society. I want to see you made completely whole. Those secret places in our lives, the things that we want to hide and not talk about, the things that we just want to go, that's just kind of how I am, and just sort of fumble along. Jesus is like, oh, no. You want to come follow me? I'm going to create opportunities that highlight, that draw out that stuff so that you can be made whole. I think that is the invitation of the gospel. Daughter, your faith has made you well. Now, I just want to say that I believe that there among us right now, that there are folks that God is moving and saying, just putting a little pressure point on you where you go, I remember that thing, that failure, that place that I'm ashamed of, that thing that, really I just work around. And Jesus said, the invitation of God is, just reach out and touch the hem of my garment. I want to heal you. I have healing and wholeness to offer. I believe most of us spend our life in some way or another coping with how we grew up, experiences we've had. A story that I'm reminded of from my parents. They lost a house. They'd owned a home, and they had, in the early 80s or economic, downturn. My dad's business didn't see any revenue for 6 months. They ended up having to sell the home. They didn't quite get it foreclosed on, but they lost it in that they didn't want to have to move out, but they had to sell it under duress. And they rented for the next 18 years. And the reason why they rented during all that time, the economy recovered. My dad had a great run in business. Didn't buy a house for 18 years because their spirits were broke. They had gotten broken. They just it wasn't until my wife and I were buying a home that they decided they could buy a home too. And they looked at us and said, gosh, if those guys, then anybody, right? And it was like, and I look and I just say, I think there are hundreds of ways that we have these things happen, whether it's things our father said to us when we were little that have defined us, or whether it's stuff that's happened to us as we're growing up. There are things that smack us down. And Jesus is wanting to say, look, actually, I don't just want to save your soul. I want to make you whole. I want to restore in you that sense of, I am made to be awesome. I have power in me and influence in me to change the way the world works around me. Whether that's the way that I'm treating a child, or the vision that I have for this company, or the hard work that I'm rendering, or whether the way that I'm leading my family. God is saying there's every part of you, even that secret hidden place that's dripping blood and making you anemic. Even there, I want to see you transformed. I want to see you made whole. So as we wrap up in worship, and worship team, you can come on up. I'm going to just open up a time for people to be prayed for. And we're going to do it in the back, not because it needs to be hidden, but it's a little quieter back there. And invite you, if this is a thing that you go, God is stirring something in me, then come on back and get prayed for. Because I promise you, God is very, very interested in seeing you be whole, seeing you filled with confidence and vision and hope for the future. So let me just pray and then we'll... Jesus, thank you that this story is true. Thank you that you want to use even menstruation to our part of your story to make us know how much you love us. God, would you be working? Would you be moving?